So today I went and picked up one of the new Mesa Boogie Subway Bass DI preamps. Tried it out in the shop. It was a great tone, really great piece of gear, so I thought I'd come and do a bit of a gear review on it. I'm playing my favourite bass. It's my Fodera Monarch Deluxe. This is a beautiful bass with an ebony top, an alder body, a walnut back, and this fingerboard material called pink ivory. The strings are a little bit worn in, so they're not super zingy, but it's a very warm tone, and it's obviously can be an active or passive bass. So as you can see on the preamp, I'm starting with the voicing flat and all the EQ flat, so we're just getting a very neutral tone to start off with. So a very neutral tone to begin with. All the EQ's flat. The voicing thing here is in flat as well, and the deep's off. So just to quickly look at the controls on the front panel, the instrument input here on the right, you've got the power LED, you've got your EQ, bass, low, mid, high, mid and treble, an input gain, master. You've also got this voicing control here. All the way to the left it's just a flat EQ, and as you go to the right it will boost a smiley face EQ. It'll dip your mids and give you more lows and highs. That's a very nicely crafted preset EQ as well. You've got an active passive switch. My bass is currently in active mode, so I've got the switch on active, and this deep switch here will it'll give you more low end when you engage it, but internally this has a high pass filter, which means it's a filter in there which will filter out your sub lows to protect your speaker cabinets if you're playing very high, that sort of thing. Sometimes the bass can you can get some of those really strong subs and it's not really needed, you can't hear it, and it just puts more strain on your cab and amp, and you can get a bit of distortion. So internally it has a filter to cut that out. With the deep off, that filter is a little bit higher, which means it'll be cutting more of your subs out. If you engage it, it will boost the lows, plus it will lower the frequency of that filter, so you'll actually be getting more subs in there as well. Really nice. You just want to get a lot more sub, like a really thick rock tone or dub out, really kind of subby reggae sort of thing. It's really nice. On the back too, you've got your on the side here, the through output that can just go straight to an amp. On this side here you've got a DI out. The DI out level will be controlled by the input, but it doesn't have an output. The DI output will be affected by the input gain, but not the master. So this is just once you've set the input gain, it's just a set output microphone level, which can go to a PA. Then you've got here obviously power, you've got ground switch for the DI, you've got a little switch behind here which is pre and post EQ. So the DI could obviously just be your raw bass tone, or it can be the EQ'd tone from the preamp. And then here you've got two preamp outs, a jack preamp out and an XLR preamp out. This preamp out will be affected by the master volume. So this is really cool because, say, like I'm intending to play this through a QSC K10 live, just a small powered speaker or maybe two. If I link them out of the preamp outputs, the master here will be my stage volume, so I can affect my stage volume with the master pot without affecting what's going to the PA as well. However, when it's going to the PA, once I've set the gain at the right level, me affecting my on-stage volume with the master won't affect the sound guy's bass input level. That's very handy. So you're not changing his mix every time you want to turn up or down on stage. That's just a quick overview of the controls, but anyone who's a pro bass player or looking at such a nice bit of gear, you're probably going to be able to get around the controls quite easily, and it's all later out in the manual anyway. What I'd like to do is show you some of the sounds you can get out of this. Obviously I've got a nice bass, but this bass is very versatile as well, so you can get quite a lot. I guess what I'm trying to show is that the Subway represents these things very well. And does not get in the way of any tone you want to achieve. It doesn't stop you in any one direction. It's not too rock, it's not too funky, it's not too anything. It really enhances whatever you want to do. The recording that you're going to hear is just the bass straight into the Subway preamp, straight into the Lynx Hilo converter, which is a very nice mastering converter, and then straight into the computer. So first off, we've got the bass in dual coil mode. The EQ flat, it is inactive here and it's inactive here. The deep is off, the voicing is flat, and all the EQ is flat as well. So very warm but basic sort of tone, very balanced. It's just a very round sort of fingerstyle tone. What we can do is flick this into single coil mode to get a bit more of an open jazz type sound. So from that basic tone, one of the first things I'm going to do is crank up the voicing knob. Having this up around sort of the 11 or 12 o'clock, we'll go just before 12 o'clock. That seems to me like a scooped sound in the realm of what I'd usually go for. So I'll contrast that with the flat. We can get a bit more of a scoop, which also makes it a little bit louder as well. Now, the good thing I really like about this voicing control is it's actually quite subtle. It's not one of these drastic smiley face EQs that just takes all the mids out of everything, gets rid of all the definition in your playing, and just sounds like, you know, Fieldy from Korn, which is all just sub and click. It's even up at halfway with the bass in single coil mode, so you hear a bit more top end. You can hear a little bit of that kind of top end from the string rattle coming through. But it's really nice. The voicing there at 12 o'clock is a really nice flavour. It's not extreme at all. The next thing we can do is throw on the deep. Now it'll be a bit hard to hear that probably through laptop speakers or headphones or whatever, but I'm here in my nice mastering studio with my Focal Twins, and I've got a little sub as well. When I hit that deep on, everything in the room starts shaking. It is very deep. It puts a lot more bass. All the bass really opens up. You really start getting some nice sub. So another sort of tone that I would like to go for is I'll keep this in dual coil mode to get that sort of punchier thing. I'm going to roll to the back pickup a little bit. I'm just going to go for that nasally Jarko kind of tone. Now the low mid control I think is centered around 200 Hertz, which is a very warm sort of warm frequency center. The high mid's up around sort of 400 or 500 I think, which is a bit more kind of boxy, barky kind of tone. Very punchy mid-range. The good thing too about this, and I find on all Mesa gear, is they use very high quality electronics, so a little bit of EQ goes a long way. It's not like when you get something cheap and you crank it up and you don't really hear that much difference, or it needs to go, you know, to 3 or 4 o'clock before you hear anything. You'll hear something even just putting it up between 12 and 1 or 2 o'clock. Like I said with that EQ, even that bit of EQ there and the deep has actually sent it into clipping, so I'm just going to pull this back a little bit. We can try that too in single coil. You go right back to the back pickup. So you're really getting a nice help from the preamp EQ there when you go back for that back pickup nasally tone. Being able to turn on the deep function and crank up some of the mids and the bass is going to really help you fill out that nasally sort of Jarko tone. We love the articulation of the back pickup, but the back pickup unfortunately does lose a lot of warmth. You can put it back in with this preamp and it sounds really fat. When you get that back pickup tone sounding so fat with all that mid-range punch but complemented by such a deep low end behind it, at a good stage volume, that is a very powerful tone. Which is why a lot of people really like it. It's articulate, it's full, it's fat. But the problem is if you have cheap gear that you're running into, a cheap bass or a cheap preamp or a cheap amp, is you don't get that warmth, that really extended low end that complements that sound, and it can sound quite weak. But through the Mesa, no problem at all. Huge on any setting. So we're in single coil there. We can try that in dual coil. Same tone, just once again, the dual coil's a bit fatter, a bit rounder. Really nice tone if you're into that sort of style. So another one we'd like to do, which I can get on this bass, and which is really helped by the preamp, we'll shuffle things around a little bit. We'll put the mids back in 12 o'clock. We'll go into single coil mode, and we'll go for more of a Marcus Millery kind of thing. So we'll crank the treble up a bit. Single coil. Put a little bit treble on the bass and drop the mids a little bit. So we're still on the back pickup there. And obviously both pickups evenly for the Marcus Miller tone. My strings are a little bit old, so they're not quite as zingy as you probably want for that really sort of jazz bassy Marcus Miller tone, but it does still get there. What I like about the treble on Mesa gear is it's very smooth. They seem to work a perfect balance between it being trebly enough to cut through in a band and getting enough of the high, mid and lower highs kind of information, but also not sounding harsh and clacky. Some amps, when they want a very pretty high end, they boost up really high up around your more sibilant frequencies, and it doesn't have that kind of 2K to 4K kind of higher, brighter, meaty high end to cut through when it needs to compete with other instruments. On the other hand, too much of that clacky high mid and not enough of the pretty, like really high, pretty sort of 10K sort of stuff, and it sounds too clacky and barky, but not sweet enough. All the Mesa stuff gets a nice balance between those two things. Very sweet tone, but it'll cut through as well. So as you're seeing here, we've cranked the treble up a little bit, put a bit more in the bass. If you follow Marcus Miller, I'm sure you know that song. Excuse my playing. But yeah, once again, very bright, scooped, at a good stage volume. That's going to have that tone as well, all complemented by the Subway. Obviously, we're not struggling for a good bass tone out of this instrument, but it's all perfectly complemented with the Subway. Another thing to remember too, I ran through all these tones. I did my test today through my single QSC K10. You can tell going straight into a powered speaker when you have a cheap preamp versus an expensive one. A cheap preamp is more dull, less responsive, and just a generally less full sound. This sounded huge. It sounded really good, easily workable on stage for a quiet gig, but very responsive, like right on the money. There was just no tone being lost. It's really nice, really nice. Even if you wanted to go just for a basic sort of middle of the range fingerstyle tone, not particularly back pickup and not particularly scooped either. My personal taste, I'll leave the voicing anywhere between 11 and 12 o'clock. I think it sounds fantastic there. I don't see myself really using it at this flat position. It sounds really nice and kind of like the natural contour of an amp and speaker to me when you've got that up around that 11 and 12 o'clock. Keep the deep on. We'll go back to dual coils, just pick up straight in the middle, EQ on the bass flat, EQ flat here. A bit more treble for a bit of a fingerstyle tone. So he's getting a bit more of that kind of air on top with the treble. Your high mid's going to give you a bit more articulation. If you want that kind of more rounded sort of thing, that's nice too. But if you want some of that really thick warmth, the low mids is nice too. Really creamy. Another tone I always really liked was Stuart Zender's Jamiroquai tone, which is always very, well, it's a Warwick sort of thing, but it was always this huge fat low end and low mids with a bit of nice crispness on top. For that sort of thing, you'd probably want to go a little bit front pickup, and you'd want to roll in some of your low mids. I think a lot of that 200, which is where the low mids are, is very, very warm and thick tone as well. Throw a bit of bass in there and a bit of treble. You could adjust the treble on this to suit. Get a bit more snap if you just crank it right up there. And we've got the deep switch on as well. You might know this bass line. Actually cranking the EQ so much that we're getting a bit of distortion, so I'll just pull the master back. So that's a bit of a warmer tone on the front pickup, a bit of a thicker, me sort of emulating that Warwick sort of thing. Once again, with the extensive EQ you get on the Subway preamp, easily done. The last thing I wanted to point out on here, which I think is a really cool feature I found out when I was trying it out today, the bass actually has an active passive switch too, and so does this. So what I can actually do as well is switch the bass and the preamp both into passive mode. And what's nice here is that the gain change on the preamp kind of matches the gain change on the bass very well. So it's actually very similar volume. Active, which is a bit more scooped. Passive. I mean, it might, if you wanted to change it on the fly, it might warrant a slight volume adjustment. But if you had this on stage and you just bust into some more vintage song or more of a classic song or something, and you decide you want to go for more of a passive tone, bang bang, that's nice as well, and it doesn't change your volume greatly. So even in a passive mode, we can roll a bit more of the mids and the lows in. Maybe go single coil and go on the front a little. So even on the passive mode there, the passive input with a bit of EQ help there sounds huge. More vintage tone, but it has the EQ and the warmth to really support that and have it sound very thick and creamy as well. So I hope those few examples give you a pretty good idea of where you can shape the tone with a nice bass and with the help of the EQ and the warmth of this preamp. And like I said, you'll be able to see in the manual, you know, a great explanation of what every control does, but I just wanted to record some sound examples for you as well. Really light, not very expensive, but really high quality sound. I love everything that Mesa does. I use Mesa guitar and bass amps. I'm very happy with this purchase as well. Really great for a little walk-in rig like bass, this. I can fit that in the bag, the tote bag of a QSC speaker. Just walk straight into a gig with the leads and it sounds killer. Like really, for a quiet gig where I don't need my big 610 cab, awesome tone. Really awesome tone. So I'll have a bit of a play on the way out. But yeah, any questions at all about this or anything I'm doing, just leave me a comment below and have a good one.